You're not welcome here anymore." The words, delivered with a chilling finality that had nothing to do with the festive carols playing softly in the background, landed like shards of ice. I blinked, the fairy lights blurring for a second as my brain struggled to process the statement. Christmas. My family's Christmas. The one we'd had every year since I could remember, a chaotic, noisy, sometimes overly saccharine tradition that was as much a part of my identity as my own name. And my brother, Daniel, the architect of this sudden expulsion, was standing there, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips that made my stomach clench. My normal life, up until that moment, had been a delicate balancing act. For years, I'd navigated the subtle currents of resentment and entitlement that flowed from Daniel. He was the golden child, the one who'd always had it easier, who'd always taken more, and who'd never once thought to look back at me, the quieter, more compliant sibling, struggling to keep up. Our parents, bless their hearts, were oblivious. They saw Daniel's occasional boorishness as a sign of his strong personality and my quiet acquiescence as proof of my easygoing nature. They didn't see the way he'd subtly undermined me, chipped away at my confidence, or the way his every achievement, no matter how small, was amplified while mine, even the significant ones, were met with a dismissive shrug. It was a constant, low-grade hum of unfairness, a familiar ache I'd learned to live with. There was the time, sophomore year of college, when he'd borrowed my meticulously saved tuition money. Not for textbooks, not for necessities, but for a brand new sports car he'd barely kept for 6 months before trading it in. He'd sworn up and down he'd pay me back, then conveniently forgotten when the due date for my own fees arrived. My parents, when I'd tentatively brought it up, had gently chided me for being too rigid, suggesting I understand Daniel's needs. He'd paid me back, eventually, months later, with a casual wave of his hand and a mumbled apology that felt more like an afterthought. Then there was the inheritance. After Grandma passed, her will was surprisingly straightforward. A modest sum, split evenly. Daniel, however, discovered a loophole, a minor technicality he'd been subtly hinting at for months. He presented it to our parents as a matter of fairness, arguing that since he was the one who'd supposedly helped Grandma with her finances, a blatant fabrication, he deserved a slightly larger share. My parents, again, sided with him. I received my share, technically what was owed, but the feeling of being outmaneuvered, of having my inheritance chipped away by his avarice, left a bitter taste. It wasn't the money, not really. It was the principle. It was the cold, calculated way he'd always found a way to get more, leaving me with just enough. The Christmas Eve dinner was supposed to be a respite. The scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air, the tree lights casting a warm glow. My parents were buzzing with excitement, Daniel was holding court with some exaggerated story about his latest business venture, and I was trying to enjoy the familiar ritual. Then, it happened. My mother, her face beaming, pulled out a box wrapped in shimmering gold paper. "This is a special gift this year," she announced, her voice laced with pride. "Something I know you'll both appreciate." I decided to finally sell the old lake house. My breath hitched. The lake house. Grandma's lake house. The place where I'd spent every summer of my childhood, the place that held 1,000 cherished memories. Daniel's eyes, however, lit up with a different kind of avarice. "Oh, that's brilliant, Mum," he exclaimed, a little too eagerly. "I've been meaning to suggest that for ages. Such a money pit, that place. But I'm sure it'll fetch a good price. Especially with the way the market is." He then turned to me, his smirk widening. "Don't worry, sis, you'll get your share, of course. A nice little bonus for all those fond memories, right?" The casual way he dismissed the house, the place that was so much more than just bricks and mortar to me, the way he immediately calculated its monetary value, it was like a physical blow. He hadn't even bothered to ask if I wanted to keep anything, if I had any sentimental attachment. It was just another asset to be liquidated. The silence that followed his statement was heavy, broken only by the crackling of the fireplace. My parents, seeing the shift in my expression, tried to smooth things over. "It's just a house, dear," my mother said softly. "And you'll always have the memories." Daniel, oblivious or indifferent to my distress, launched into another anecdote, already mentally spending the proceeds. That was the moment. The moment I knew I couldn't just endure anymore. The moment the familiar ache solidified into a cold resolve. I didn't confront him. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Instead, I excused myself from the table, feigning a headache, and retreated to my childhood bedroom. The air in that room, usually filled with nostalgia, felt suffocating. I pulled out my laptop, my fingers moving with a speed and precision that surprised even me. I'd spent months, in the quiet hours after work, meticulously gathering the evidence. The financial statements, the property deeds, the correspondence, all the meticulously documented proof of Daniel's years of subtle manipulation and outright deceit. He'd been so careless, so arrogant in his belief that I would never challenge him, that he'd left a trail a mile wide. I remembered his generous loan for my first car, the one he'd charged me exorbitant interest on, disguised as a family favor. I remembered the way he'd accidentally overstated the expenses for a joint investment, pocketing the difference. Each piece of paper, each saved email, was a brick in the wall I was building. The next morning, the house was abuzz with preparations for the day's festivities. Daniel, still basking in the glow of his perceived victory over the lake house, was offering unsolicited advice to my father on how to carve the turkey. I walked into the living room, a single manila envelope in my hand. All eyes turned to me. Daniel offered his usual dismissive smile. "Back from your sulk, sis," he drawled. I ignored him. I walked directly to my parents, who were seated on the sofa, and placed the envelope on the coffee table between them. "There are some documents in here," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I think you should review them." My father, a little confused, picked it up. As he began to leaf through the pages, his smile faltered. My mother leaned closer, her brow furrowed. Daniel, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, finally stopped preening and sauntered over. "What's all this?" he asked, peering over my father's shoulder. His eyes scanned the first few pages, the bank statements detailing the disguised loans, the meticulously annotated property records, the proof of his fraudulent expense claims. The smugness began to drain from his face, replaced by a dawning horror. He looked at me, his eyes wide, searching for an explanation, for a way out. But I offered none. I simply met his gaze, a quiet, unwavering certainty in my own. The color drained from his face, his jaw slackened, and for the first time in my life, I saw him truly speechless, utterly defeated. The fallout was immediate and explosive, though not in the way Daniel might have expected. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic accusations. Instead, a wave of frantic text messages flooded my phone. My mother, tearfully pleading for understanding. My father, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and disappointment, demanding explanations. Daniel, of course, was apoplectic. He called, he texted, he even showed up at my apartment, only to find the locks changed. He'd underestimated me, and in doing so, he'd underestimated the quiet power of truth, meticulously laid bare. My parents, armed with the irrefutable evidence, finally saw him for what he truly was, not the charming, misunderstood son, but a calculating opportunist who had preyed on their trust and his siblings' good nature. The lake house sale was halted, the proceeds frozen pending a full financial audit of Daniel's past dealings with the family. His reputation, carefully cultivated over decades, began to crumble. Friends he'd boasted about, business associates he'd leveraged, started to distance themselves once the whispers turned into verifiable facts. He was no longer the successful entrepreneur, he was the man who'd been caught in a web of his own making. He found himself ostracized, not by my doing, but by his own actions, exposed for the world to see. Christmas came and went without him. My parents, shaken but resolute, spent it quietly. The silence in the house was profound, a stark contrast to the usual boisterous celebrations. It wasn't a happy silence, not yet, but it was a clean one. The air felt lighter, free from the unspoken tension that had permeated our family gatherings for so long. Daniel, I heard through the grapevine, was having a very different holiday. The truth, once unleashed, had a way of burning everything in its path. And in the quiet aftermath, there was a strange, cold sense of peace.